Karan, it's wonderful to have you in the show.
But prioritization coming back is, I think, one of the key challenges. Honestly, their job, if you ask me, is to help the blue team just do better. Literally, they're on your side. If an attack happened 2 weeks ago and you just don't have the logs, you lack the visibility to detect it, right? And so that becomes the logging issue. So the most obvious ones is, hey, your day to day is to detect and successfully stop intrusions and attempts of intrusions to keep the company safe. Period. I'm sort of very cautious with saying do this fast. Right? I would probably say do this the right way.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for tuning into another episode of Scale to Zero. I'm Purushottam, co founder and CTO of Cloudanix. Today's episode is focused on threat detection and blue teaming. To discuss on this topic, we have Karan Dwivedi with us. Karan is a security engineering manager at Google with expertise in defensive engineering, which is also known as blue team. And it covers areas like threat detection, incident response, and digital forensic, to name a few. He has successfully led projects with very large scale tech companies in Silicon Valley to improve security for over a billion users. His interviewing articles at allthingspond.com are provided as interview preparation material by Google hiring team. He serves as a program committee member of the DFRWS conference, B-Sides SF conference, and he's part of the editorial board member of several international journals in digital forensics as well. Karan, it's wonderful to have you in the show. For our viewers who may not be familiar with your work, do you want to share about your journey a little bit?
Yeah, thanks for having me here. It's a pleasure to talk to you. Yeah, I think I've been in Silicon Valley for the last, I want to say, 7, 8 years. I started my career at Yahoo, and right when I joined, I mean, they had the world's largest breach, right? So I was right in the center of that whole situation, I would say. But it was a great learning experience because how often do you get to see that happen live, right? So, I was part of the blue team there doing incident response, forensics. I spent 2 years there, and then I moved to Google security. So Google has detection and response, which is their larger organization. So I've been since then at Google. I've worked in different initiatives. Obviously, recently I moved to. So I spent 4 years doing detection and response in different areas, and then I recently moved to securing the enterprise infrastructure protection that has specifically to do with cloud. So think of the whole detection and prevention as two sides of the same coin, right? So you're detecting and the other side is preventing, which I'm sure we'll talk about a lot today. But that's a quick intro. So I love working with people and making impact that I can get up in the morning and be excited about. Okay, what I did today touched a lot of lives. Right? I think that's pretty key.
So talk about timing, huh? With Yahoo, like when you joined Yahoo, right? But yeah, I'm pretty sure you must have learned a lot. So I'm looking forward to learning some of that from this as part of this conversation, right? So let's start with the blue team, right? So there are a number of difficult challenges that number of difficult challenges in running a successful blue team,
Hmm.
and or the defensive team. And blue
Yeah.
teams typically spend a lot of time looking at different types of alerts, right?
Yeah.
So according to you, how does members of blue team work with these challenges?
Yeah, that's a great question. So this is very typical, right? Like I would say there's a bunch of challenges. I'll touch upon a few like major ones, and I'm sure I'll miss a few because there's so many, right? But
Mm-hmm.
very typically, there's always a constant challenge of how do you prioritize your detections? How do you prioritize your response, right? Because it's literally impossible. I would say next to impossible to detect and respond to every single thing, right?
Right.
So when you have too many threats, you have to write logic detection threats and against them, right? And so ideally, if you ask me, ideally the best thing is you have a threat model and you're like,
Mm-hmm.
okay, this informs me of all of the risks that my organization has, right? And at this point I'm not even talking about detection per se, I'm talking about risks in general, right? And then you stack rank them. and you say, "Yep, look, here's my top five, next three, and bottom two," right? And then you work your way from the top till the bottom, and you figure out whether you can like prevent it, right? Just avoid it right away, mitigate it through some methods, and then finally, if you cannot do anything in that area, that's when you go and think about, can I now detect this? Because that's like, okay, if something happens, I know, right? So there are some you what you just accept. Some organizations
Hmm.
do that, right? You cannot always mitigate or prevent or detect. So you're like, okay, this is fine for us. But prioritization coming back is, I think, one of the key challenges. And I'm speaking from experience, by the way. It's nothing to do with one organization or the other. But yeah, that's number one, I feel.
Hmm.
Number two is, I guess, manual toil, if you want to call that, right? Because a lot of people think, this is very typical. A lot of people think, detection response is this, a room where you sit with a bunch of
Yeah.
monitors and you monitor like the lines and they turn red and somebody does something. It's not like NASA. Although that'd be super cool. I know that some places may have that, but it is similar but not quite, right? Like you have a way to look at what's happening in your organization through some sort of alerting mechanism, I would say, ideally. So this leads to toil, right? So it's
Hmm.
obvious that if a human is involved, there's manual work, right? You can automate a lot of things, sure, but like
Right.
triaging the alerts, analyzing the alerts, and then figuring out what's happening, what other data do you need, how does this tie up, that's literally human manual work, right? So that toil is constant, and
Right.
a blue team actively has to figure out where they are putting their time and what can machines do instead. So it's everywhere. Like there's manual work in prioritization, there's manual work in actually doing the work. There's
Hmm.
only so much that machines can do. So I would say that's like pretty high. The pro of that, the positive side of it, it helps you build some unified tooling, right? You can say, look, here's my logs, here's my detection way of detecting stuff. I'm talking very generically here. So here's
Hmm.
some input, here's some way to analyze them, and here's some way to prioritize them, right? In a nutshell. And then you go about, okay, now that I have prioritized them, what can I do to automate myself away in that analysis piece? And where should I stop? That's very key. Where do you stop? And
Hmm.
at what point do you make those decisions yourself? So that boils down to like how do you escalate and stuff like that. So follow up triage, right, is a lot of it manual. So again, you can also measure impact, I would say, by hours saved per analyst. Like sometimes people are not incentivized to work on, hey, I've just like reduced toil, I didn't analyze alerts. But
Right.
like you can incentivize engineers to say, look, you saved X hours per person on the team. And you can translate that to dollars, and that's pretty straightforward, right? That's, I think, second thing on my list. I would say, and it's pretty obvious, but the third thing is burnout, right? So you have so much things happening. You have prioritization, you have toil. That will lead to burnout for the team. And this is talked less, in my opinion, in the industry than it is prevalent. Like I myself have been on the other side where I have told people I'm burnt out. I'm going to take like a week or two off, and that's not for vacation. That's to reset myself.
Right.
Right? So it
Right.
takes a toll on the team. And
Hmm.
I would say like management and people responsible should actively work to figure out the load of the team, proactively watch out for it, distribute it across time zones. Like there's so many ways to do this, right?
Right.
There's night.
Yeah.
I've done in my life night shifts. I've done weekend shifts. Like you name the time, I've been awake on that shift. And so I've seen so many variations across the board, and it is not just talked about so much. So like top three, these are the top three in my list, I would say.
Okay. I liked a few things that you highlighted. One is most organizations do not say that, hey, we will accept some issues or some threats, right?
Yeah,
But it maybe that's the right thing to do, right? Depending on how many threats you are dealing with, even like based on your threat model, does it even matter, right? So based on that, maybe you should accept some of the threats. And the other
yeah,
thing that you highlighted is the burnout, right? that
yeah,
uh, that makes a lot of sense, and particularly during the COVID time when everybody was working from home, that was a
yeah,
major challenge, right, that everybody
yeah,
was going through. So a follow-up question to that is, we highlighted the challenges, right? Like you highlighted the challenges. How would, in that case, the blue team define what's success for them, and how will they keep track of their progress?
Yeah, and so it boils down to again a number of things, I would say, right? And I'll touch upon the obvious but also non-obvious, right? So the most obvious ones is, hey, your day to day is to detect and successfully stop intrusions and attempts of intrusions to keep the company safe. Period. Right? That's if that's a one-liner mission that I can write, that's what I would write first.
Mm-hmm.
But there's a lot to it, right? It's not just external, right? There's nuances there. So an obvious metric is like, have you successfully, a number of times you have successfully prevented or detected and stopped it right away. How many have you detected and stopped red teams and purple teams and other teams that actually emulate external attackers? Like, how many alerts are you triaging, analyzing, and mitigating within some SLO that you have? Right? SLO is
Mm-hmm.
again organizational, threat dependent. I would even say number of alerts analyzed and the severity, right? So are you always looking at low severity ones, or are you actually doing the high severity ones faster over time, right? So again, I'm going a little bit nuanced there, but what I would love to see is the team reducing toil and and increasing automation over time, so they can look at higher priority alerts, high severity alerts faster than they were doing a month ago,
Mm-hmm.
right? And this can be team level metrics. I'm not saying this is like board level thing that's going up. It can go up in some shape or form, but like if you define the core metrics at the team level and you track them, then I think it's easier to derive other metrics, like some derivative metrics.
Makes a lot of sense. And two things that you highlighted, right? One is the other teams, either internal, which are like red or purple team, or
Yeah.
external. They sort of create more problems for blue team, right? Because they are either attacking the system, they're
Yeah.
taking offensive role, right? So I want to touch on that a little bit. So generally, red teams are like counterparts, right? And they're attacking the system.
Yeah.
So, what steps should be taken to identify that it's a red team activity, and how can their access or something can be blocked?
I would first say that they are not adversaries, they are partners. I think that's a huge distinction. They're
Mm-hmm.
adversaries in the sense on a technical level, yes, they might look the same or similar as external attackers, but they're partners, right? Honestly, their job, if you ask me, is to help the blue team just do better. Literally. They're on your side, right? So I would say the steps are very subjective. Like if you're trying to identify how to identify them, it's subjective based on what TTP exists, like threat tactics, techniques, and procedures. Like what are these specifics? I would say it
Mm-hmm.
varies based on that. But like the goal of the blue team in this case, I would say, is to have enough coverage of those high severity, high priority techniques, tactics, and procedures to be able to say, oh, we have caught them early enough. And early enough is subjective, right? So you might say, look,
Right.
they ran a scan, we caught them. Two, they were about to get root access and we just caught them. There's a huge, the chain of attack,
Difference.
in the kill chain
Mm-hmm.
is going forward. And so where you detect them is a way to think about, how efficient you are and how you have went about it. So because techniques of detection vary, right?
Mm-hmm.
I would actually add, you had talked about a little bit how to define success. There's so many metrics you can do there. You can say, hey, coverage by operating system, coverage by, as I said, TTPs itself, time to detect, response, and mitigate, right? Like there are different times, and you can actually use them the same as external as red team or purple team.
Mm-hmm.
All of this counts as goes into the steps. So you actually build a cohesive blue team program based on your risk and based on your threats, and the steps won't be any different, but how they move and what they do changes. Look, they're on your side. They're not going to cause, at the end, they're not supposed to cause massive damage. It's all approved and stuff, hopefully.
Mm-hmm.
But their outcome should be shared with you in a room and say, hey, look, we did this exercise, you caught us here, but you didn't catch us here, so go do
Right.
this.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So it feeds back into your prioritization challenge, which I talked about, right? Go prioritize this instead.
Yeah. So I like how you highlighted, like, as a first sentence to the response, that they are not your adversaries, right? They are your partners in a way. They are helping you as in the blue team get better, right? So that you can have better coverage of risks or coverage of the threat model and stuff like that. So the activity that the red team performs, should
Mhm.
that be treated differently than an external attacker?
Not very much. I would say it's. I wouldn't treat it very differently, right? Because at the end
Okay.
of the day, they are trying to stimulate, or sorry, simulate the external
Simulate.
attack, right? So I wouldn't treat them differently. What I would, I wouldn't bank on being kind, if I may put it that way.
Hmm.
I would actually treat this as a challenge where failure is helping us grow, just like anything else, right? Yeah, I wouldn't treat them any differently, but also I would watch out for places where they have more access or they use something that external attackers may not know, right?
Hmm.
Because there's also a knowledge gap, right? Internal folks know a lot, and they might try to, in their attack simulation, use some of that. So you have to be careful of when you are a blue team and digesting information from the red team. Look
Hmm.
at where the internals lie, and can an external attacker get the same information that they have or access
Hmm.
that they have, right? And
Hmm.
ideally, focus on the parts that anybody could do, like any external attacker could do. A great red
Hmm.
team will always be very close to an external attacker. They will not try to use anything like I would say that they know already. They will try to figure it out, if I may say.
Yeah, yeah. Makes sense because at the end of the day, we are trying to, as you said, right? Red team is trying to simulate as an external attacker. The closer they are to the external attack spectrum, the better it is for the blue team to
Yeah,
improve the defense mechanism, right? So,
exactly.
as part of the, let's say, as part of the work, the blue
Yeah.
team that they do, how do they collect, let's say, network traffic data or the forensic data so that they can analyze and test and get better?
Yeah, and it's really depends, right, on the environment. So there's just so many
Okay.
tools out there. I don't want to name any like specific ones on purpose because it's like it depends on what you use, I would say. But like in general, if you ask me, how do you go about collecting evidence, right? It depends on the type. So let's say you're trying to understand, okay, if I want to figure out what's happening on my network, right? I have several ways to go about it. I can look at IDS. If I can look at IPS. I can look at something on the edge router if we have logs on the network side, see if we have not the full packet capture because that's too much sometimes. Just look at flow logs if you have them, right? If you're
Mm-hmm.
collecting them, how you do it, how often you collect them, how long do you keep, again, organizational dependent, right? And so as you'll realize, if an attack happened 2 weeks ago and you just don't have the logs, you lack the visibility to detect it, right?
Right.
And so
Yeah.
that becomes a logging issue. So it's very nuanced, and that's what I love about it, because it's like there's so many multi-dimensional challenges involved in successfully driving a blue team, right? I would
Mm-hmm.
say for remote forensic, that's a new, I guess, exciting thing. It's been going on for a while, I would say. But if you look at tools like GRR, it's an open source
Mm-hmm.
tool. But GR allows you, it's fantastic because it allows you to collect data from like remote hosts. So you can have agents and you can pull data out the moment they're available, right? And so you don't have to like wait for a machine to come online and stuff.
Ah,
So
okay.
there's a bunch of open source tools out there, contributed by different companies or organizations or individuals, right? But nothing really beats forensically sound collection done locally on a machine. So I'm sitting in front of a machine. I can put the
Mm-hmm.
right buffer in and collect the hard drive as nicely as I can. Like with in my own leisure time, I can collect it without any network issue, without anything else bothering me. That's like the best case scenario. And I've done that so many times in my career. But
Mm-hmm.
with everything these days, remote collection has become very prevalent.
Right.
So
Right.
yeah, to answer your question, depends on the type of logs, depends on what agents you have, what configurations you have, how long you keep things. But like you can pull logs from the system. You can pull system logs or specific application logs. You can pull hard drive memory, depending on where you are. Like physical logs
Mm-hmm.
in front of the machine. That's awesome because you get the latest and greatest. I would say.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Um, but yeah, there's a lot. There's so much advancement these days in tools.
So one thing that you highlighted, the flow logs, right? And
Mhm.
I believe all the clouds recommend that you enable flow logs so that you can deal with
Yeah.
some things like these, right? You can look at your network traffic, you can run some analysis, and
Yeah.
helps with your threat detection and stuff like that as well. But it
Yeah.
also comes with additional overhead in terms of a lot of data, as you highlighted, right? You have to
Mhm.
analyze a lot of data, or it has cost impact as well, right? Sometimes because you have to store that so that you can do analysis, or you need to have a tool so that you can analyze it. And
Yep.
often that comes to budget, right?
Yep.
And in an organization, security is often looked at like a last priority when it comes to budget, and threat hunting is even low priority when we talk about budget, right?
Mhm.
So how should organizations or the security teams deal with these challenges, budget constraints for threat hunting purposes?
Yeah, and I will tie back up to what I said earlier. Remember, I talked about prioritization, right?
Mm-hmm.
So think about think about budget constraints as you have a certain amount of money that you want to put towards solving problem X, which in this case is mitigating or tackling risk, right? If you have a prioritized list of I want to do this and I'm okay with not doing something at the bottom, that's what you need. So invest in the right places, right? And look, sometimes it actually makes sense where you store a log for 3 months or 6 months, whatever is legally allowed or by regulations and stuff like that, and that would be fine. But sometimes you're okay with just having a month, because you know what, there might be some other log type that you can join, and that may be suffice, that may just work for you. So you have to figure out this tiny details and see, okay, I want information X to detect Y. How do I get X in the most efficient manner so that I can confidently trace back? And
Mm-hmm.
you need a lot of engineering, I guess, brain power in this, because you need to understand each field in the log honestly and say, I'm getting value here and not here. So can we just store these 5 things and store these 6 things here and join and we're done? Because that meets the
Mm-hmm.
budget. But hopefully it's not very granular. The budgets don't work okay on a thread by thread basis. I'm just
Right.
sort of exaggerating to drive home the point that you can actually go, if you like, go granular and actually figure out. But retention is a big thing. I think most, if you look at data storage, that's where the costs are, along with the
Mm-hmm.
product that people offer. So blue team has to work hand in hand with people who are funding and say, look, if you give us this, or we need this to give you this, that's what your money will buy. Not a lot of conversations happen so openly in that area, I would say, right? So I think it's upon the teams to drive that with leadership.
Mm-hmm. So two things I could like understand out of it is, one is you need to absolutely understand that you cannot fix everything, right? You have to have that prioritization so that you can tackle the highest impact items and have a clear conversation with other stakeholder, other teams, or the person who is writing the check, right? So that they
Yeah,
understand the impact, impact of it, and then
yeah,
support you in these areas.
yeah.
Uh,
And a lot of
Go
leaders
ahead, go
also,
ahead.
I was just going to add, a lot of leaders, when they climb up the ladder, they already have worked. So they already have the context. It's not like they have to sit with analysts and stuff all day long. But it just
Mhm.
drives home the point that those decisions should be informed by data, and you should know what you're buying at some high level.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely agree. One thing that you highlighted in the last answer is that the logs or the data that is needed for analysis is very
Mhm.
important, right, for the blue teams.
Yeah.
And so, what steps need to be followed to prevent that there is no loss of that data before it comes to the, let's say, the forensic experts?
That's a good question. I think it boils down to reliability, if you ask me. But if, let's say, you're collecting something manually, I would say just be calm first. And that's not even a technical advice. That's advice coming from somebody who has been in incident response and has stayed and has gotten up from sleep and responded to something urgent right away. And your brain may not work that time. So you need to have, what I'm getting at is, you need to have good playbooks. You need to be able to say, when emergency hits, here's what we do, right? When emergency does not hit, we are calm, we are, the world is okay. We go and figure out what are the best, most sound ways to collect data and of a certain type, and we write that down in exhaustive detail and we practice it. So if you're talking about collecting logs from a machine that's remote, here's the steps. Click these buttons, do this, automate this, you'll get it here. It will be in this file
Mm-hmm.
format, and then you plug it into this tool to analyze it. It should be so clear, it should pretty much be like a human can just do it, even
Mm-hmm.
if they're half asleep. So remain calm and don't make those mistakes because most people want to rush through it. But realizing that a lot of data is volatile. So let's say you're collecting memory and you're panicking and you're clicking a bunch of buttons. Well, guess what? You're creating more processes. You're mangling the memory that's already there that may have some evidence, right? So you have to be very diligent on what you do. Avoid starting up new processes, as I said, right? When you know
Mm-hmm.
machine is compromised, like a lot of people just want to turn it off. They're like, okay, we're done, right?
Yeah.
But realize you just lost data, like so valuable data, right? You could have, if you already have playbooks and on collecting it, avoid turning it off abruptly. If you have in-house forensics expertise, that's amazing because they can go and collect something in that moment, hopefully. If not, then close, and then you can take mitigation steps. Because you know what, when you do that, you let the other side know who's in your systems that you are on it. So it's always a cat and mouse game at the end. um, the same thing is with when you're trying to, so let's say you've collected, right? You have playbooks and you have a sound way of collecting, local data as well. The next thing is the chain of custody, right? So let's say I
Mm-hmm.
collected evidence today. Ideally, I would fill out a form that says, my name, Karan, I collected this evidence, this date, this time, right? I am giving it off to legal now or somebody else for doing X, and that's recorded because tomorrow, if there's if there's litigation, you can prove that data was not mangled, right? It has integrity. So, as I said, the first step, calm, right? You have to remember these steps. You have to follow the process and playbooks.
Mm-hmm.
If you don't have, build them, right? Because it's pretty critical. Because if you cannot attest to the fact that data has not changed, right, or you can just say, oh, we don't know, it may be changed. Guess what? The facts don't line up,
Right.
and
Yeah.
yeah, so it has. That's where it has consequences.
So you lose that authenticity and trust on that data set, right? In a way.
Yeah, yeah, and you can't build your case or whatever you're trying to prove, or not
Mm-hmm.
always the case, but let's say you're trying to prove a timeline of X thing happened, then Y happened that led to Z. If you can't prove that the data didn't change, or somebody didn't mess up by accident, also you lose that trust, right? You're just like now guessing or inferring, which is not really great in when you're forensically analyzing something. You need to have hardcore facts. So yeah,
Okay,
I would I
that
would
makes a lot
focus
of
on
sense.
those points. Yeah,
Yeah. That makes a lot of sense. So I have one follow up question on this. So nowadays there are more like attackers have more ways to attack, and for stakeholders of security stakeholders or others in the organization, they want to speed up the process, right? So that you can preserve the data, you do analysis quickly.
yeah.
What's your recommendation on that?
I'm sort of very cautious with saying do this fast. Right? I would probably say do this the right way because,
Okay.
as I said, like if you don't follow your playbooks, you may mess up data. You may mess up the chain of custody. You may not collect the whole thing. You will just lack the data you really need to speed up. Sometimes going fast is actually going slow in this case. So that's one, like something I learned is like, yes, going fast and achieving things or doing things quickly can work, but it's a big asterisk because you're losing quality somewhere. You're compromising that, or you're like an expert and you can do it faster because you've already done it. Guess what? You've already done it 10,000 times. So there is that. I would caution people who are saying let's go fast just because of going fast. Go fast in the right way. I would modify that advice. Use software, use processes that are approved by your legal teams, that are accepted by the courts. There are some software that have you know been accepted and said, okay, this works because we have talked to this team and we accept this. Go and figure that out and use that instead. That's what gets you speed, not let's just get it out of the way so you can do something else.
Yeah. So the message that I'm getting from your response is that do it properly
Yeah,
and have the automation or process in place so that you can move fast, but
yeah,
not at the cost of compromising the data quality or the evidence that you're trying to collect and the process that you're trying to follow.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. So I see that you have a lot of experience in, like, you joined Yahoo at the sort of right time in a way where you could learn a lot.
Yeah.
So let's say somebody is starting their career
Mhm.
in threat hunting or blue teaming or red teaming or purple teaming. Where should they start from?
If they're talking about starting career, a lot of people want to get a hold of really what's happening on the ground. And a lot of engineering analyst roles are sort of stepping stones, and they still are. Right, it's been true
Hmm.
for a decade and it's still true today. But that analyst role has morphed into more of engineering, right? Because again, automation, AI, a lot of assistance, right? So it's now become the person looking at alerts and just clicking buttons to now has become more of, I would say, analyzing it and figuring out what's happening. So to get back to your question, where they should start from, I would say there are, in my opinion, there's like three different pillars that one should build. And I talk about this when I give university talks or something else. In my mind, three pillars. One, knowledge, right? Make sure you know your concept. So like understand systems, operating system concept, network concepts, application concepts, right? Get that right. And then you build a layer on top of it, which is security concept. So you insert security at each layer. How does operating system security work? Right? How does network security work at each OSI layer? Figure that out, read through it, spend days on it until you get it. Because tomorrow you will use one of those fields in one of those protocols somewhere that will change the game of the analysis, right? So, and the last thing I would say, the layer on top of that in the knowledge space is risk and impact. So then you look at the entire org and see how they're doing. That's a knowledge pillar, right? The second pillar I would say is skills. So there's something you do. I would say if you're starting out, go learn about CTFs, capture the flags, competitions which help you. Like you have an environment, you have given a puzzle, solve this. You'll use similar tools. It may not be the real, obviously, attack, but you learn.
Hmm.
Go do some automation using Python. There's so many code labs and I guess courses these days out there, right? Spend time building that skill, that muscle memory, right? Like when I was working in IR, like playbooks were in my head. I could go execute the commands. I had shortcuts for most of the commands I used to run. I run four of them and we're done, right? So reach that maturity, I would say, in your skills. And then last is, which cannot be replaced, is experience. So on the ground, real world experience is what really gets you that confidence in blue team, I would say. You can read all the books, you can do all the code labs, but like if you have not faced an incident, you're not gonna have that experience, I would say. So look for, like, if you're starting out, look for internship, look for part-time, even if it's volunteering, it's fine because people need people to work.
Hmm.
And you can start off with that, and guess what, people will be happy to pay you later because they can see the quality of your work and see you're a team player and stuff like that. Do open source projects, so many out there, like great ways to build your resume. So it's a myth that, hey, like I need to have some experience to get a role. No, you can just have to build all these three pillars.
Right. Yeah. Makes a lot of sense. Especially the one around skills, right? Most of the folks, what they do is they, like, it's like difference between theory and practicals, right? Doing
Yeah,
practicals. They just
exactly.
read books and they're like, yeah, I know, or they have done some certification and they feel like they're ready for it,
Yep.
right? But it's the
Yep.
time that you put in to do it actually that helps you. So
Yeah.
on that front, any reference materials like blogs or podcasts or videos that you would recommend?
Yeah, I mean, right beside me, I have a bunch of books, but that's things I read. But I mean, to start off with, if you're asking, still the question is about somebody starting out.
Hmm.
For operating systems, look at this bunch of books out there. I would pick anyone out there that explains the concepts, right? For infosec, there's also infosec handbook. I think it's called Introduction to Information Security. Pick that one
Hmm.
out. I think you can find it on Amazon somewhere. For blue team specifically, there's blue team handbook. I would really recommend that one. It's a small guide. It's literally this much, right? I have it right here. And it was funny because I picked it up in my first year when I started working, and I found an error in the book, and I ended up emailing the author, and his name is Dan Murdoch, or Don Murdoch. Excuse me if I'm messing that up. And guess what? He responded. He's like, actually, yeah, that's right. I'm gonna update this, and he sent me a signed copy of his next book. I still have it right beside me here.
Hmm.
And you network this way, and you learn more, and you get +1 from somebody who has written a book. So it
That's
happened by
amazing,
chance.
actually.
It
Yeah,
happened
that's
by chance,
amazing.
right? And I was like, you know what, this person is super receptive to feedback, so I'm going to convey and publicize this book out of my own. I'm not, I'm not incentivized by him or anybody else, but I love the idea that the author was willing to take feedback and actually do something about it. He shipped me for free, like that book. So go out there and find books like this. I mean, I have a bunch that I use. I also use there's a bunch of forensics books I use. So it's one of the books is by Brian Carrier, if I'm remembering his name correctly. He has a book on that talks about how to do forensics on disk images. So he talks about file. I think, yeah, his name is File System Forensics. That's the book's name. And
Oh,
File
okay.
System Forensics is a masterpiece. Like literally, I have read that book like n number of times back to back, because the way Brian has described each file system is amazing. Like he can break down FAT, NTFS, partition by partition, byte by byte, and you can look
Oh,
at it
wow.
on your screen. Really recommend all of those stuff.
Okay. So thank you for sharing those. What we'll do is we'll make sure to tag them when we publish the
Yeah,
video so that our
yeah,
viewers can go and read those books as well. So
yeah.
that's a great way to end the security section. Here are a few important points I could gather. The first one is understanding the threat model in depth is very important for blue team to be successful. The second one is red teams should be considered as partners rather than adversaries in building and improving the threat defense program. Third one is accuracy of digital forensic data is key for analyzing and improving security defense programs. It should not be compromised in order to move fast. So let's go to
Mhm.
the rapid fire section. Fire section.
Sure.
So the first question is, what advice would you give to your 25-year-old self starting in security?
I would say to myself, probably start networking early and often, because I feel like even though I did that, but not to the extent I should have, and I picked that up in the last few years quite a bit. It is something you're doing in parallel. Remember we talked about the knowledge, skills, and experience thing. You do networking in parallel. It's a parallel thread that you run,
Mm-hmm.
and the network effects compound over time, just like knowledge. Right, so you
Yeah.
may just like I build a connection with an author randomly just by a cold email. He has a network of authors, right? So they are second degree, third degree connections, but until you have that first, it's hard to get a hold of the others. So I would just say that
Okay.
to
Makes
myself.
a lot of sense. Like that's how you assimilate knowledge that somebody else has, and you grow. Right.
Yeah.
Makes sense. The second one is a one-liner quote that keeps you going.
So this is a little bit funny, but also I don't want to sound negative. I always remember like life is short, right? And it's not because, oh, like we're just going to vanish one day. It helps me really prioritize things. It helps me drive clarity on what I want to do, right, on a yearly basis, daily basis, in a decade from now. How am I focusing on the right things in personal life and career and my team and what's happening there? It drives so much. And like people fret over things like, oh, does they're really bothered by something. I'm like, will this matter in 5 years or 10 years or 15 years? If not, then don't worry about it. So it's just that that one three words
Mm-hmm.
is sometimes more than enough to like drive that for me.
That's lovely. I makes a lot of sense. Also, what's the biggest lie you have heard in cybersecurity?
Oh yeah. So I would say it has to do with I was remembering a
I
line.
can see a few
Yeah,
coming actually.
yeah. I start with one. So maybe this is the biggest one. I feel job postings, right? And I'm not targeting any company or anything. This is within the industry. A lot of times people get the impression, and this may be the way it's written or not, or maybe the way it's interpreted, is people feel they need to meet all the criteria for applying for a job, for applying, not qualifying. And I browse just to look what people are, how people are writing, and They have a list, a huge list. We need, 5 certifications. We need X amount of experience. And guess what? People are not going to apply because they'll self-reject themselves even before they hit the button. And I rather get an email that says, okay, you're not the best fit because of Y, than me self-rejecting myself. But that's just me, like how I've trained myself, what I've learned. It's the biggest lie, in my opinion. That's really fueling the shortage we're having in the industry. There's so much demand for people, and people are just stopping themselves from applying. Or we should do a better job at writing these postings, honestly.
Yeah, and I can relate to it. I'm pretty sure a lot of folks can relate to it, right? When we go through any job posting, we see and we're like, okay, I qualify for these five, but I do not qualify for these. Then there is a section of preferred versus mandatory. It becomes very confusing. So
Right.
yeah, I love that.
Yeah, I've had my fair share of frustration with that, and I'm like, how can we improve this across the board, right? How can we do this better or solve this problem better? Because it's a problem.
Hmm. Yeah. So that's a great way to end the episode. Thank you so much, Karan, for joining us. It was a fun discussion
Yeah.
to learn about Blue Team and how they work with others, and stuff like that. So thank you for coming to the show.
No, I really enjoyed talking to you. Thanks so much for the insightful questions. I mean, it's hard to memorize any answers. It's a lot of it is just ad hoc based on what you asked, and so it's a lot of fun to like have this discussion with you. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much. And to our viewers, thanks for watching. Hope you have learned something new. If you have any questions around security, share those at scale20.com. We'll get those answered by an expert in the security space. See you in the next episode. Thank you.